Good morning. Today we're going to begin the book of Numbers. And, I've always thought that Numbers was kind of a strange name for a book in the Bible. But in some ways it makes sense because Numbers begins with a census, counting all of the people of the tribes of Israel on the first month of the second year after they've been led out of captivity in Egypt. So, if they got let out of captivity in January last year, the census would be February of this year. So it's a counting of the people of Israel that were freed from slavery. And it follows their journey to the promised land. And then a second census takes place, counting the number of Israelites that enter the promised land. And in the old Hebrew scriptures, this book was sometimes called In the Wilderness. And that makes sense that it would be in the wilderness because the Israelites, spent 40 years in the wilderness. And they weren't just moving all of the time. They were, probably the majority of the time was in one place. And they were there primarily because they complained and they murmured and they just couldn't follow God. And even Moses, of that first generation of people that left Egypt, Moses didn't get to the promised land either. Joshua and Caleb were pretty much the only two. And Joshua is the one who becomes the leader of the Israelites as Moses' death, or as Moses is taken up into heaven. We don't have a death of Moses. We don't have a burial place for Moses. We talked about those things before. But so this book of Numbers talks about the journey of the Israelites, the time that the Israelites spent in the wilderness, and the provisions that God made for them, continually made for them. I mean, they made the golden calf. They intermarried with other people. They worshiped other idols. They just complained and they just couldn't wrap their heads around freedom. I mean, and this was, and I can I understand that a little bit. You think about as you grew up, in your mom and dad's house. I mean, you didn't really have to worry about a lot of things. I mean, they provided for your, a place for you to sleep, meals for you to eat. All your needs were met, and maybe you had some chores and different things that way. But all of a sudden you find yourself out on your own in the world, and you have to make your own decisions about what to eat and when to go to bed and what to do, and so many things. So it's when you're used to having somebody tell you what to do all of the time, and then all of a sudden you've got these choices. You're free to make your own decisions. It's hard, and it takes a mindset that way to change a little bit. And as for these Israelites, they didn't. They'd been slaves for 400 years, and they didn't know how to make these decisions and do these things on earth. They were used to being told what to do. But with that same token, I mean, as we left our homes, hopefully we grew up. We learned to accept the responsibilities. Hopefully it didn't take us, 40 years of wandering to do that. But they continued to see God's faithfulness in all of that. And in some ways, this book of Numbers is written for us in order to show us that, or help us to understand why, the Israelites are going to be, conquered by the Babylonians and by the other nations throughout, the time of history, why they wouldn't remain a free people. And it's a way, in a way, it's a reflection of our lives. I mean, like I started out, we were, brought up by our parents, and they provided for us. And then, we we need to figure out how to live on our own. And then we find ourselves kind of, we got a house, we got a mortgage, we got a job, we got responsibilities that, hold us in place a little bit as well. But it's in figuring out how to live with all of those things. And so the book of Numbers in many ways is a way that the people of Israel are learning to live as a free people, despite their inability to follow God, their blindness to God's love, their continued, need for dependence, need for someone to tell them what to do. But yet God was faithful to the people, and many scholars look at this time in the wilderness, and I think probably rightly so, as a time of God leading and guiding, but yet leading and guiding with that firm hand, not letting just anything and everything go. And the Israelites didn't always understand that so well either. But so going on, looking at these first 3 chapters briefly. Chapter 1 begins, the Lord spoke to Moses in the wilderness of Sinai, in the tent of the meeting, first day, 2nd month, 2nd year. So, 13 months, as I said, started after they've been set free from captivity. He says, take a census of the whole congregation of Israel, and so he says, and then these are the names of the men who will assist you, and from the tribe of Reuben, use this person, and so the 12 tribes were there, and it goes through, and it gives us the number of people of each tribe, each of this. Well, I'm going to say 12, but only actually 11 of the tribes of Israel, because we find out that they didn't. God says, don't count the tribe of the Levites, because they will be priests. And in some ways then the taking of the census was to, it allocated as to like the tribe of Dan was here, and, the different tribes, the different groups settled around the tent of the tabernacle. This is, the tent of the tabernacle is in the middle, and then the 12 tribes, set up their camps around that. But, the whole number in verse 46 of chapter 1 says was 603,550. That's how many Israelites were led out of captivity. That's how many were there, 13 months after they left. And if you remember when Joseph was in Israel and all of Jacob and his family came, the number was like 70, wasn't it? I don't remember the exact number now, but, quite a growth of population. And then verse 48 is where it says, the Lord said to Moses, of the tribe of Levi, you shall not take a census, because they are going to be the priests. They're going to be, taking control of that. And part of the reason for a census is always to designate so many people as guards, as soldiers, as that way. Chapter 2 talks about the layout of the camp as they would settle. And, as I said, they would settle in a place and they would be there for some time. So they would set the tent of the tabernacle up, and the different tribes of Israel would sit around, and the tribe of Levi was always right by the camp. And, it was like in verse 18, it just says, on the west side shall be the regimental encampment of Ephraim by company, and on the, so it's, it wasn't just a helter-skelter setup, but again, God had it planned out. God had it mapped out for them. And again, in verse 32 of this chapter 2, it says the enrollment of the Israelites by their household, it was 603,550. Just as the Lord commanded, the Levites were not counted in that census. Chapter 3 talks about, the lineage of Aaron and Moses, the tribe of Levi, the priests, and, verse 5, bring the tribe of Levi near and set them before Aaron the priest so they may assist him. And then the Levites were grouped by parentage, by lineage as well that way too, as they were all set out. But it's just, and chapter 3 talks about the duties of the Levites, the duties of the priests. So the book of Numbers begins with a census of the people, and God telling them how to set up their camp and getting everything in order. So God, again, is providing order out of the chaos of just flight. They're not just running at abandon, but God has a plan set up and put in place for the Israelites as they spend this time in the wilderness.